You step outside this morning and say something. Maybe to yourself, maybe to the dog, maybe it's just, oh, it's cold under your breath. And the yard shifts. The robin at the edge of the lawn stops walking. The chickadees at the feeder go quiet for exactly one beat. The cardinal in the holly takes one hop to the left. You probably didn't notice. I do. I've been doing it for about 5 years now, standing at the back door in Northern Virginia, watching what happens in the first 2 seconds after I make a sound outside. Here's what most people don't know. By the time you said whatever you said this morning, there was already a bird in your yard that knew it was you. Not a human, not your neighbor, you specifically. And what happened in those 2 or 3 seconds before you looked up tells a story about your birds, your yard, and the relationship you have with both that most people standing in that same spot will never stop to think about. Welcome. If you're new here, subscribe before you leave, because this is a channel about learning to see what your yard is actually doing. Today we are going through 7 things that happen the moment your birds hear your voice. What they process, what they remember, and what, after weeks or years of listening to you, they've already decided. Stay until number 7. That's the one I keep coming back to. Number 1. The first 200 milliseconds. Before you finish a single syllable, something has already happened in every bird within earshot. The research on avian acoustic threat processing, work that comes partly out of Cornell and has been confirmed across dozens of songbird species, tells us that passerines process incoming sounds and begin sorting them as threat or non-threat in roughly 200 milliseconds. You blink slower than that. In those 200 milliseconds, a black-capped chickadee, all 11 grams of it. The weight of 2 pennies has already separated your voice from wind noise, from the neighbor's car, from every other sound in the yard. Not because it consciously sorted them, because a human voice carries a specific acoustic signature, a resonance pattern and frequency range that most songbirds have mapped precisely after a lifetime of living near us. It is not background sound. The moment it arrives, it goes into a different file entirely. What you see from your side is the freeze. The robin at the lawn's edge stops mid-step. The tufted titmouse at the feeder pauses. The chickadee turns its head sideways. Researchers call this investigative orientation, turning to bring one eye forward for higher resolution assessment. They're not alarmed, not yet. They're taking stock. It's not wind. It's not the lawnmower. It's not the mail truck. It's a human voice. And everything wired into their nervous system knows the difference. I used to think this was random behavior, the kind of thing birds do and undo 100 times a day. It's not random. It's the moment your yard decides what kind of morning it's going to be. And what happens after that freeze depends entirely on what your yard already knows about you. Number 2. Your voice already has a file. Here's where this gets harder to sit with, because it's not just that birds can distinguish human voice from other sounds. The research suggests that many common backyard species can distinguish individual human voices, not just male from female, not just adult from child, specific individuals. The most documented work on this comes from northern mockingbirds, 48 grams, roughly the weight of a large walnut, studied at the University of Florida. Researchers had specific humans repeatedly approach mockingbird nests. Within 4 visits, the birds responded more aggressively to those specific individuals than to strangers. Change the clothes, change the approach angle. The bird still knew. And the acoustic signature, the voice, was part of the recognition profile. American crows have this more sharply developed. The work out of the University of Washington on crow cognition is clear that crows build individual profiles on specific humans, faces, voices, behavioral patterns, and share those profiles within their social group. The 450-gram crow, roughly the weight of a loaf of bread, watching you from the wire above your driveway, is not registering human. It is registering you. I need to be clear that direct voice recognition research in cardinals, chickadees, and robins is less complete than the mockingbird and corvid studies. The mechanisms are documented. The full behavioral picture in your common feeder birds is still being worked out. I'll tell you when I'm near the edge of what the science has confirmed, and this is one of those places. What we do know is this. Birds in your yard, after weeks and months of repeated exposure to you specifically, respond differently to you than to strangers. The flight initiation distance, the FID, the distance at which a bird decides to flee, shrinks. The freeze response shortens. Normal foraging resumes faster. Your yard is not neutral about you. It has been building a case. Number 3. How fast the filing happens. 3 to 5 weeks. That number comes up again and again in habituation studies. How quickly wild birds reduce their threat response to a specific individual in a specific context. Dark-eyed juncos, 18 grams, smaller than a house key, will cut their flight initiation distance roughly in half after consistent, non-threatening exposure to a specific human over that window. 3 to 5 weeks is nothing. That's the span from early April to early May. That's exactly the window when most people first start sitting outside with the morning coffee, first start noticing what's at the feeder. Here's what the research from Cornell and from field studies published in Animal Behavior tells me, and what I didn't understand until my second year of paying real attention. Habituation is specific. The junco that has filed you as low threat after 5 weeks of you sitting quietly on the porch does not transfer that trust to a stranger. Your neighbor walks out the same back door the next weekend, and those same birds flush to the fence line. The file is about you, accessed when your specific voice or silhouette enters the scene. The blue jay at your feeder, 85 grams, one of the more watchful birds in an eastern suburban yard, tracks these individual profiles actively. When an unfamiliar person enters a familiar yard, blue jays elevate their alert posture faster, call more, stay higher in the branches longer than when the yard's known resident appears. They are not reacting to human in yard. They are reacting to which human. Your birds have been building this file since the first week you moved in, or the first week they arrived for winter. Whatever is on that file, it has been accumulating for a long time. And the next item is about one of the things that goes on it that most people have absolutely no idea about. Number 4. What your tone communicates. I want to be honest about why I'm putting this here instead of somewhere more comfortable. About a year ago, a Friday evening last spring, sometime around 7 p.m., I had a hard conversation in the backyard. I was on the phone. My voice was raised, and it stayed raised for about 10 or 12 minutes. I was upset about something I don't need to go into, and by the time I came back inside, I wasn't thinking about the birds at all. I looked at the feeders the next morning. They were slower, not empty, just slower. The Tuesday couple, the chickadees who come to my yard every Tuesday morning around 7, showed up nearly 40 minutes later than their usual arrival. That's not how they behave on normal mornings. I can't prove causality. But what I know from the research made me think hard about what had happened the night before. Here's what the science says. A raised human voice in a heated conversation registers around 85 to 93 decibels. That is loud enough to trigger elevated alarm states in every bird within earshot. Not a full flush, necessarily, but a disrupted foraging pattern, an elevated alert posture that takes time to come back down. Research from the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology tells us that sounds in that range, especially unpredictable sounds from a previously low-threat source that suddenly goes loud, can disrupt normal behavior for 12 to 20 minutes after the sound ends, and the association gets built into the file, not metaphorically. The bird's associative memory is linking the voice, the elevated volume, the context. I'm not going to tell you this means you can't ever have a hard conversation outside. I'm still working on that myself. What I am going to tell you is that when you've spent 3 months becoming the low-threat presence in your yard, the patient one, the still one, the one whose voice means the coast is clear, one rough evening registers. The file gets updated. I learned this the hard way, you don't have to. But if you think your voice only matters to the bird looking right at you, you're missing the bigger picture. Number 5. How your voice travels through the whole yard. When birds hear your voice, you are not having a private exchange with a single bird. You are entering a network. And that network does something with the information. The research on this comes from the University of Washington. Chris Templeton's lab, published in the journal Science in 2005, and it established that black-capped chickadee alarm calls carry encoded information about both the type and the estimated size of a threat. 7 distinct note combinations, each one carrying specific meaning that birds of other species can read. Tufted titmice respond to chickadee alarms. White-breasted nuthatches respond. Dark-eyed juncos respond. This is called heterospecific eavesdropping. Birds of one species actively reading the alarm signals of another. And it means your yard, at the acoustic level, functions as one alert system rather than a collection of separate birds. When your voice causes a chickadee to alarm, the signal it sends carries information about what was perceived and how seriously. Every bird within 50 feet is now processing that. The blue jay on the fence raises its alert posture. The robin pauses. The cardinal goes quiet. What I find genuinely hard to stop thinking about is this. Once you become a known, low-threat presence, the alarm your voice triggers is graded down accordingly. The chickadee's call is shorter, quieter. The network reads the input and produces a proportional response. Your yard, in some functional sense, has reached a shared assessment of you. Across species, and each morning you step outside, that assessment gets checked again in real time. That process took time, took you showing up, took you being predictable. But it happened, and you were there for all of it, mostly without knowing it was underway. Number 6. The yard that knows you versus the yard that doesn't. There are two versions of what your yard looks like when a person walks into it. There is the yard a stranger walks into. Compressed, the edges of the feeder zone abandoned, every bird a few feet farther back than usual, and there is the yard you walk into. The difference is measurable. Studies on flight initiation distance in suburban passerines, cardinals, robins, Carolina wrens, show that birds habituated to a specific individual flush at roughly 4 to 6 feet versus the 20-foot flush distance for an unfamiliar human. The cardinal you've been watching from the window for 3 months will let you within arm's reach before making any decision to leave. Recovery time shortens too. One study found that birds return to a feeder area within about 12 minutes of a known individual leaving versus about 35 minutes after an unfamiliar person. The yard that knows you stays active around you. The yard that doesn't goes still. I noticed this last October when my wife's brother came to visit for a weekend. He's a good person. He just wasn't the yard's person. He stood near the tube feeder where I stand every morning, and the behavior was completely different. The cardinal who comes within 5 or 6 feet of me when I'm filling that feeder flushed to the back fence and stayed there for close to an hour. Not because he was a threat, because he wasn't me. Your birds have not just learned to tolerate your yard, they have learned to tolerate you specifically. Those are not the same thing. And the voice that opened that relationship, the one that's been building that case for however long you've been in this yard, that's what we're going to talk about in the last item. Because what it means took me a while to understand. Number 7. What it means that they know your voice. I've saved this one for last because it has to be last. At 6:48 on a Tuesday morning last March, I was standing at the kitchen window with the first cup of coffee, still not fully awake. The Tuesday couple were at the tube feeder. The chickadee pair that has been coming to my yard for 4 winters now. Same feeder, same time, every Tuesday morning, within 15 minutes either way. I started calling them the Tuesday couple somewhere in the second winter because the pattern was too consistent to dismiss. I pushed open the back door, and I said good morning, out loud. I don't know exactly why, habit, maybe, or just the particular kind of morning it was. And they didn't move, not the freeze, not the flush. They stayed at the feeder. One of them turned its head in my direction, investigative orientation, though I didn't have that language yet, and then went right back to the seed. And I stood there in the cold doorway with my coffee, and I didn't know what to do with that. Here's what I understand now. An 11-gram bird, a brain roughly the size of a large blueberry, has stored the specific acoustic signature of my voice, not human voice in general, not adult male voice. Mine, the particular resonance and frequency pattern that is mine and not my neighbor's and not a stranger walking through the gate. And after 4 winters of Tuesday mornings, that voice is filed under a category that means not a threat. Stay. Not because I feed them. Not because they have nowhere else to go. Not because there's no other feeder in the neighborhood. They heard my voice and made a decision. About me, specifically, I don't have great words for what that is. The science calls it individual human recognition and reduced threat categorization. That's accurate. What it doesn't say is what it feels like to stand in a cold doorway and realize that something wild and small and entirely free has been paying that close attention to you, and has decided, after 4 winters of Tuesday mornings, that you are okay. I'm not going to tell you that's something more than biology. I'm not going to tell you it's something less. What I can tell you is that the Tuesday couple were still at the feeder when I finally went back inside. And that morning, the yard felt the way it does when something has been true for a long time and you're just now catching up to it. You stepped outside this morning and said something. Maybe to yourself, maybe to no one in particular. Maybe just because it was quiet and the yard was there and it felt like the right thing to do. But you weren't the first one awake. You weren't the first one listening. The chickadees in the maple and the cardinal at the holly and the robin already moving across the lawn. They'd been up for hours before you arrived, and by the time you opened the door, they already knew who was coming. Your yard has been building a file on you for as long as you've been in it. Every morning you show up, every time you fill the feeder or sit still on the back steps or talk quietly to yourself, without knowing anyone is paying attention, that file gets updated. And somewhere in the maple, in the holly, in the oak out back, birds keep making decisions. They're making one right now. Has there ever been a morning when you stepped outside and a bird just stayed? When the yard felt different than usual and you didn't quite know why? Tell me about it in the comments. I want to hear about it. And these are the stories I carry the longest. I read everyone. I'll see you in the next one.